Yeah, so welcome back everybody to episode 6 of the Doctor and the Dogman podcast. We're still here, going strong, 6 episodes in.
Well, we're going strong. I don't know about everybody else.
Don't know if any listeners are going strong, but yeah, we're enjoying it, aren't we?
Yes, most definitely.
Finding already such a diverse range of topics to talk about, and the last few, including this one, has been a bit of a crossover, hasn't it, between dogs and humans, which is relevant. And
I think what's interesting is as we decided on the subject 3 odd weeks ago, it sort of links to both, let's say, the human side and the dog side. So it brings a lot of what you do into it and how things fit with you. And the science. Now, it's quite interesting because I did a bit of research on this because I was sort of quizzing myself over a few things. And some of the, I'll come on to it later on, but some terminologies came on, I know what that means. Yeah. And it was really quite weird to read this article and just pick out, I know what that means. I know what they mean by that.
yeah.
So it was good. Yeah. So yes, this month's topic, is...
Are dogs good for your health?
Not good for your memory, is it? What was the title again?
Well, it's going to be an interesting one. I think I've come to this podcast as a new dog owner so Marlowe's now 7 months, saying everything which I didn't expect has just been a dream. And now on the month that we're discussing our dog's good for our health, Marlowe just takes a turn at 7 months and says, right, wham, we're going to throw you a curveball and everything you've trained me over the last 5 months. We're going to just switch it up a notch. So, I'm not sure actually whether they are good for your health or not.
This happens a lot at this sort of age with dogs. Yeah. They sort of get towards some form of, I suppose the easy way to describe it is sexual maturity, but they're growing up and they're exploring more, they're getting more confident. And I've seen it with people who have taken dogs in the past who have been quite nervous, quite quiet, and they've built the dog up. They've put lots of confidence in the dog because they've done lots of great training with them and just developed the dog's understanding of the world that it's living in. And the dog then just leaps and bounds forward. And the next thing is the person who goes, oh my God, this dog is just full on, And what they've worked on is actually creating a dog that is very confident, but they've not done certain things like teaching it to settle or just teaching it some of the boundaries. They've not wanted to say no to the dog because, and I know that's not the case with you, but yeah, it can happen for a lot of reasons. These dogs can start to get a little bit, I suppose, people say, they've got selective hearing now at this age. Is that what you'd say?
Yeah, that rings true.
Yeah.
Marlowe doesn't know his name's Marlowe anymore. No, he does. I think, and in the interest of transparency, it's funny, anybody that's kind of stuck with us through all of these episodes might say, I've had a very different experience. I've had a puppy that was hard from day one. And I think when we came and chose Marlowe, we thought we were choosing the boy out of the litter that was going to throw a few curveballs. He always has been confident since day one. So we thought that might actually be opposite of what we've experienced, that actually it might be something that we need to kind of manage from day one, whereas actually that kind of confidence has really allowed him to kind of explore the world and kind of almost have a limited fear in the first couple of months, which he's taken in his stride. But now this will be where obviously it transitions over to, I am quite a confident young male dog.
Happens with female dogs as well.
Yeah, and it's just something that we need to work on. And it's not necessarily bad things, but I'm sure people can, resonate with that. And it's just, I think, I suppose the work and the time and the practices that you're going through, they get used to those approaches, don't they? And get used to kind of what the rewards are for positive behaviour and.
Yeah, and again, I think part of it is the difficulty with what a lot of people get is that he's still a puppy at the end of the day, and we're trying to build into him, and we're a lot of people stick with food for a long time, and I don't like sticking with food for a long time. I quickly transition off food, because I think there's more value to the dog in a game or an affection or an attention. Yeah. that tends to be more valuable to them. They're not stupid. They realise that they're not starving. They realise that every morning and every evening they get fed. So the treats, yeah, they're okay, but and dogs don't have treats in the way we have treats. They don't. It's just food. Do you know what I mean? They don't go, oh, snack, great stuff.
Chocolate bar, thank you very much.
Exactly, with me cup of tea. Yeah. They don't have it like that. So therefore, the value of the food, once the basic needs have been fulfilled, are not that great.
Yes, yeah.
And they know they're going to get fed. They know that they're not going to starve. And therefore, that food just becomes, yeah, okay, it's not too bad. Where I then take it very quickly, once they've sort of learned to behaviours, is we start to put them with toys, with games, with things that make the reward value higher. Yeah. But also the other good thing is as well, the things that he's regressing on, and he knows those things. You've taught him those things already, so you can say from quite clearly, I know he knows that.
Yeah, and I think it's about focusing as well, because on some days, and people with 7-month-old puppies will understand this, there's some days where you feel like they don't recognise anything that you've taught them. A prime example is, from a very young age, he was taught to walk to heel on a lead, and over the last few, over the last week and a half, say, last 2 weeks, everything out in the world seems to be more exciting than I know where I'm supposed to walk, and these are the benefits of walking that way, obviously. But then, for example, this morning when I walked him, he was walked like he always had done, if that makes sense. So you can see how there's obviously some fluctuation in that behaviour, and that, whether that's hormonal, I don't know. But it's interesting to see how you mustn't, I suppose, get too, I think what I'm trying to say is downbeat on yourself and say, well, we haven't kind of taught them that behaviour and it's not ingrained as well as it could be, or give yourself a hard time, because it does kind of cut. You can see glimmers of it is still there, but there's other things that are impacting that behaviour.
It is still there, and I think it's you get it with a lot of people. It's interesting you actually sort of talk about this. A few things have happened in the last week or so whereby a couple of people have we've had conversations. I have to be careful what I say here. But people sort of expect, they send a dog to a dog trainer. Yep. And they expect the dog to be absolutely perfect. Yep. I've had a few people who've phoned me up about various things. I've got a problem with this, I've got a problem with that. And when I've spoken to those people, I said, I need you to do this, I need you to do this, and I need you to do this. And there's almost been well, why can't I just bring the dog to you? Yes. And it's like, no, it's not about, I can teach the dog to do what it needs to do, but unless I spend at least as much time teaching you what you should do as the owner, your dog's going to come home and 3 weeks down track it's going to go exactly back to what it was doing before. Yes. And I think there is a lot of people who feel that the dog goes to a dog trainer, or they get taught to sit, right, they know it, great, that's that one done, tick the box, let's move on to the next thing. And it's got to be constantly reinforced. It's got to be generalised in lots of different areas. So, sit as a prime example. Sit in this room means the same as a sit in your living room, and my kitchen and your kitchen, and my garden and your garden. So he knows it the same wherever it is. Yeah. And unless you keep developing that behaviour and keep developing his understanding of it and habituating that command into this is what I need you to do, buddy, it's never going to be solid. Being able to do a recall in here with no real distractions, feeding him treats and doing that, when you take him outside into the real world and you have rabbits running in front of you, there's no way on this planet a couple of treats and a couple of kind words is going to stop him. Yeah. So you've got to build extra into that. You've got to build more and more and more repetitions and, different tools, whistles and things like that. So, you've done the right thing to get everything in place to start with. Yeah,
it's just, I think, and everybody's probably guilty of the same, that you think that you address one thing and obviously you think the behaviour's quite ingrained, and then maybe it's natural, isn't it? You maybe stop your focus on that so much and you turn to something else that maybe have presented itself, or some addition or process that you want to build on. So I think for the first 18 to 24 months, I'm sure it's just reinforcement of the things that you're doing, just to ensure that it's almost like you can't kind of think that you've accomplished one thing, even a sit to a certain degree. I mean, you know, sometimes whether it's useful or not, but it's one of those things where it's not just something that you would train in a 10-15 minute training session and then never come back to it. Like you say, I think the repetition is the key to it.
Yeah, you'll get to the top of the hill with your training and you'll be in a situation whereby you'll think everything's gone really, really well. And all of a sudden you'll realise things are getting away from you.
Yes.
And sometimes you pick it up sooner, sometimes you pick it up later. But ultimately what you end up with is that things are running away from you. And it's about making sure you sort of spot this and just get back into letting the dog know what they need to do. And when you start to put the pressure on to reintroduce the things that you might have sort of stopped doing as much, the dog sort of flips back into, oh, okay, I remember this, I remember this.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think we'd had a conversation very early on and probably even brought it to the podcast about saying that there's different personalities in different dogs that you'll choose out of a litter, and it depends about, you know, some might say it's the lesser of two evils, but if you have a dog that doesn't sometimes need much intervention in the early weeks and months, then sometimes, like you say, it can run away from you. So I think I've said, you know, we have been completely on him for the whole time, but actually he hasn't been as difficult or tricky. And I think I'd said a couple of times on the podcast, you know, he settled almost from day one, and that's something that we've really, you know, been able to kind of enjoy about him, that, you know, at the end of busy days he settles and other things. And I think it's funny because I think it probably comes in like a wave of, you feel it's quite a big issue because you've been kind of steadily going along, and then all of a sudden, but it is just to be expected, isn't it?
It is, but you've done the right thing. You say, even though it was fairly simple early on, you've actually put the work in.
Yeah.
If you hadn't put any work in now, can you imagine how difficult it would be? Yeah. You know, he's jumping on the sofa, biting your hands, and I want you to play, but you've not taught him anything.
Yes.
So you're actually having to deal with problem behaviours that are now a lot stronger because he's a lot bigger and a lot more developed.
Yes.
And you didn't, you know, if you stopped them early on like you did when he was nipping your hands, he's like, no, off, and you then sort that out, then you've got a basis to go back, and instantly those behaviours start happening again, be it that or be it not walking nicely on the lead. You can then start to put consequences in place for the dog because I'm actually telling you something that you know how to do it, so therefore you're making a bad decision.
Yeah, and you can see it, can't you? You can see, like, and that's what I think I was just trying to say then. If it hadn't have been taught from a very young age, that there would be kind of no reverting back to that because he would be starting from scratch, wouldn't you? Whereas now you can obviously start to see, you know, this is the expectation of me, and some it might be a little bit hit and miss, but then they're 7 months, so it's a bit like, as long as you're consistent with the behaviour that you want to see.
Most definitely, you don't say you just put a good thing in place.
Yeah.
So another month's time when we do.
In a month's time when we do the next one, I'll just say, breeze. You'll be 8 months then, and I might have slightly more grey hairs than I do now.
So this subject, are dogs good for your health? Now, I've made some notes here because there were so many little rabbit holes. I looked at a couple of my sort of normal research sites. And found a few articles just to back up what I thought I was thinking of. And there were so many other things that fluctuated into that, and then things that sort of span out of it.
I think it's funny, when I first started looking at this, it was something that I thought maybe between the two of us we wouldn't have to do that much research on. We might know things independently, that we might come to our own conclusions. And then I started to think, what do people kind of quantify as good for your health?
Well, that's the big thing.
That was the big thing.
That's where I was to start with. So obviously the first side is the physical side.
Yes.
You get a dog, you do more walks, you play with your dog. So from a physical health perspective, they help you an awful lot.
Yeah.
But what stuck out to me was, I was talking to Lisa, and she said, I guess with the dog, she said, it's sort of horses for courses. It's one thing to one thing to another. She said, if we went shopping, she said, I'd love it. I'd have an afternoon doing this, doing that. Within 10 minutes, you'll be going, are you ready to go? Yeah, I've had enough. And same experience, pleasurable for her, absolute hell for me.
Yes.
So I then went, well, yeah, okay, but so therefore what you've got is a very subjective part and that's where I started to look at a couple of articles. There is no science that says that dogs are good for your health, for your for your mental health or your well-being. There's nothing out there that I could find that said dogs are good for your health. It is all subjective. It's all people thinking.
Yeah.
Did you find different?
Yeah. That might just be because of where I have access to research. Although what I would say to support that point is, and I think we've spoken on the podcast before about how we come to knowing if something is definitively good or bad, and I think I've expressed, as a scientist, saying multiple times you can't really just believe what you read, even if that scientific journal is the same as people would in a newspaper or in a magazine or from the Kennel Club, for example, or from a vet. So there's still a level of kind of what we call critical appraisal of the evidence. But there was some kind of research studies that we're moving towards a more, I would probably call it a positive trend for these things. So whether that was physical, whether that was mental, almost it still was a resounding yes, they are. I've actually tried to look at it from both points of view now, thinking practically about being an ageing researcher. And I think that later in this episode, it might be quite good to come back to, are they good for your health to a point, to an age, to a functionality, which is something that we can pick up later when we've unpicked some of this stuff. But I think for me, I would argue and advocate that becomes a point where, again, are they more of a hindrance than help to some things, so, to some people. So, it'll be interesting to unpick. There are quite a lot of studies out there that are saying yes for all of the...
But a lot of those are user or owner surveys. Yeah. There's no solid scientific double-blind control group that says they are good for your health. Prime example being, my dog's great, love him. He now starts to run around like an idiot, scream and shout at the end of his leash, barking, attacking other dogs. Yeah. Same dog now is not good for my mental well-being, sorry. So therefore, it is all, in my opinion, it's all very subjective. It's all very well and good saying dogs are great, but it's what's inside your own head that makes you go, yeah, dogs are great.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think it's probably a really good point in the episode to say when we're referring to things like randomised control trials, double-blinded, this is controlled, that's controlled. What we're meaning is we're literally putting something up against something else to do a direct comparison. And when we're obviously saying double-blinded, we're saying the people that are investigating this, the people that are part of this, nobody knows which group they're in, so there's no way that the outcomes or the results can be what we would call a scientist bias. Whereas these are actually... what we would call in research probably cross-sectional studies. So they're taking somebody's opinion at that cross-section at that point. So today, if you ask me, in terms of mental well-being, if 7-month-old puppies are good for your health, today I say no. No, I don't.
But that's what I mean.
Last month you say yes.
It's a subjective thing. I don't think you say buy a puppy and it gives off pheromones that make you feel healthier, less mentally stressed. Yeah. Because the process of owning a dog can be very stressful. If, as you said, things change, you don't put the work in for him. Yeah. There was, I'm guessing you could even look at the far end of it and say, I bought the dog from the wrong place, be that a rescue centre or a breeder, and I didn't get the support I was hoping for, and now I've got a real, little monster that's running around and chewing the legs off my sofa and things like that. All those things make life extremely stressful. Yeah. So therefore, from that perspective, that's why I went back and checked, because I'm like, it's all subjective, and I thought, well, hang on a minute, and then obviously Lisa said the thing, and I was checking up a few bits, but it was, as I can see it, from my perspective, there is a big focus on what do I think. It's like, I'll go out and work a dog, and we'll train and do something, and I get pleasure out of doing that and watching them learn and watching them. But somebody else would enjoy the dog being sat on the lap and just giving them a stroke and watching TV together. Yeah. It's not the same thing, but it's the same creature giving you different types of benefits. Yeah. And that's why I went bonkers. I went bonkers down these little rabbit holes, because there were so many different things to look at that obviously we'll come on to in the bit. I mean, but when I was looking at this, it's like, well, hang on a minute, why do we believe? Because there is so much belief in the public. Where's it come from? Why do we believe that dogs are good for our health? Not physical, obviously mental and well-being, when there's no science to back it up.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I think a common thread throughout every episode on this podcast is that where things are linked to dogs, there's always a resounding opinion, but yet we are sometimes sat here thinking, where does that come from? Yeah. And everybody's in agreement with that. Yeah. And it was funny, but because when I started to look down the physical, it made sense to me as a healthy aging researcher, as somebody who's got a background in exercise physiology. So that made sense. So the studies on dogs and human physical health is probably what we would term a correlation. So you can see the papers go right back to the 90s. And all as they are is like comparator studies. So we take a group of non-dog owners and we take a group of dog owners and we say, who are the healthier cohort? And I think you alluded to it, like, and put it very simply at the start, which makes perfect sense. Those who own dogs compared to those who don't, we would expect to see increased regular physical activity, and all of the things that we would expect to lower, age-related decline, health, problems, etc. One particular study, for example, so they were actually looking at whether owning a dog lowered your risk of coronary artery and coronary heart disease, essentially. So they took over 5,700 people attending a coronary heart disease clinic in Australia and said, do you own a dog or not? And then tested them for several different health outcomes. To which, which was something that's quite interesting, which I'll go into. So all of the individuals that owned a dog had lower levels of, so they basically had a reduced risk of heart attacks. They had lower cholesterol. They had a lower chance of developing type 2 diabetes. So all of these things. But what I think really the simple way of putting this is actually because if you maintain, and I think we'd said this maybe in the last episode, if you engage in maintaining kind of this regular level of physical activity, or even just, not kind of what we call sedentary, so not doing this for 24 hours a day, literally just sitting down, you've got better health outcomes. Yeah. So essentially what they were saying is obviously the need for dogs being animals that require activity. It was interesting because it was kind of their driving need for it, obviously improved physical health of the owner, which was really interesting because that study was actually quite interesting because it did also do a comparator of what other pets do you own. So when they did the direct comparison between are the health outcomes of dog owners the same of cat owners, they didn't see the health benefits in those that just own cats compared to those that own dogs.
Actually the physical going out, walking the dog, yes, throwing a ball for the dog, yeah, those things. So dogs in effect are the most healthy pets to own.
Yeah, so essentially they're driving us to be more physically active because of their needs, aren't they?
Well, that's interesting because I've gone down a similar line, but I've gone in a different way. Okay. So you went, back into the 90s, and they're telling you that dogs are healthier for you. Yeah. Okay. I've looked at how things have evolved through the media. So we've got things like there was one and what drove me down this line. There was one in the Independent the other day. Living with dogs helps women age better. Now, how I pulled this, I went, I'm loving this. Yeah. Pull it apart. Yes. What it actually says. First thing, living with. it's not about living with dogs, it's training dogs. These are all ex-military veterans who are given the option of either spending, I think, an hour a week or an hour a day training dogs.
Yep.
Or watching videos of people training dogs.
Okay.
And they actually, it was a very tenuous link here to actually that it does make a difference to you. This certain cells are more prevalent, and that can be, and it was like, yeah, it's a bit sort of, the stretching the reality of it. And that's the thing, a lot of it, I noticed this about why dogs, or people think dogs are healthy for us, is because the media has always been pushing these little stories. These little stories make people pick up and buy things. They make people read the magazine, click on that bit of the internet. Oh, look at that, that's interesting. So ultimately what you get is the media is pushing this narrative driven by, there's other things in here as well, driven by the sort of the very, very early stages with dogs, whereby, you know, they bonded with us. There was the ones that were capable of interacting with us. We got friendship. They also acted like an early warning system and protection for us earlier on. So we had this bond where they were healthy for us, not because they helped our mental well-being, but because they kept us safe at night while we were sleeping around the campfires and things like that. So from a very, very early age, as in when we had a human-dog relationship, we've had this feeling ingrained into us that dogs are better for us. They are our companions, they work well together with us, be that hunting down game or whatever they've been doing thousands and thousands of years ago. And that's just carried on all the way through. You know, you look in folklore and you then start, and I've just gone all over the place. You look in the folklore and you've got all these different narratives of things. You know, the dog faithfully sitting by its master's grave. Yes. All these little bits that are in literature, in myth, all these little things help to produce that narrative that dogs are good for our well-being.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because you hear comments all the time, and I think you hear this saying a lot, or I do anyway, about we are a nation of dog lovers. You hear that kind of sentence said quite a lot. We're a nation of dog lovers. And as I was kind of digging more into this, I mean, I also spoke to my Lisa as well, and I said, what would you say if I asked you this question, you know, are dogs good for our health? And she said exactly the same thing. I think that would change from one day to the next. I actually think it's more a reflection of our mental state or our mental kind of resilience or capacity or how we're feeling on that day, which is sometimes quite interesting for research, because I say this all the time. I could ask somebody a research question, and this is where we open it up to how people respond to surveys, and it is actually, whether we would like to admit it or not, all very subjective to how that person feels at that time. And I do wonder whether now, when we look back historically and we think that how dogs are good for us and they're good for our health and our mental well-being, and we've gone with this narrative for such a long time. I wonder how that would change over time in terms of all of the literature that was available kind of very early on to now, because we saw this whole idea that everybody went out in lockdown, didn't they, and bought a puppy or before, and there was just all of these dogs that then post kind of lockdown were in kind of rehoming centres, and that's a separate, obviously, a topic for a different day. But it's interesting because actually, if you were to ring up every single dog owner in the UK and say, resoundingly, would you say this dog adds to your life, or actually it's quite stressful? People would be different depending on like how the dog behaves, how well it's trained, etc., wouldn't they? And people would have a different viewpoint, I think, in terms of whether they add or not. But it was interesting because there were so many different avenues that you could go down for this. So in terms of being a scientist, and if you're looking at the science, we can follow some quite simple headings, if you like. So dogs and human physical health, and then the idea that the perceived benefits we see from physical health then transpire actually into levels of mental health. So I will 100% have that there are things about dogs making us go outside, be physically active, engage in physical activity, spend more time outside, so, increase vitamin D levels, etc. That then is, I suppose, a transient then into benefits we might see for psychological health as well, because obviously we know that if we're physically active, we're more likely to feel, better mentally, aren't we? And there's obviously that relationship. So I can kind of have that. I can see where, okay, we've got this idea that we've got physical health benefits. So have we got some psychological health benefits as well? And we can go down a couple of different avenues. Another interesting one, whilst we're kind of on physical health still, was this idea that are dogs able to facilitate better our recovery from illness? I found this quite interesting.
Wow.
So I kind of sit on two sides of the fence for this.
Lassie, go get me a Beecham's.
Yeah, make us a Lemsip. And this other, brands are available. We better say that, hadn't we? So again, it was more about physical activity, but I found it quite interesting because I thought, do you know, actually, if I went through a period of ill health, I don't know whether I would worry about Marlowe more if I was then unable to give him what I previously had. So that was kind of my first go-to. But actually, there was a couple of different studies out there that had looked at people that had suffered severely with, it might have been physical health or comorbidities. So again, along the lines of kind of coronary heart disease or periods of ill health that were linked to kind of physical function or physical health, but then also kind of mental as well. And it was quite interesting because people that owned dogs, for a couple of different health outcomes this was, were 9 times more likely to still be alive or have better prospects of recovery from illness a year after a period of ill health, whether that's kind of physical, mental, than people that didn't. So I just found that quite interesting, that statistic, that they'd essentially said that if you'd gone through a period of ill health, so whether it was maybe you'd broken your leg, for example, but then, you'd maybe regained your recovery quicker because you got to walk your dog, and then in walking your dog, but I think that translates some way mentally as well, doesn't it? I mean, the article wasn't specifically just solely focusing on that and whether the kind of benefits are transferable, but I found it really interesting. I thought it's interesting, isn't it, that then you, I suppose, can go down another rabbit hole about in terms of navigating grief or navigating kind of unfortunate situations that may arise that we might not be able to plan for. And I thought it's interesting, isn't it, that through owning a dog, we might see that it gives us a purpose, it gives us structure. We exist, if we're talking quite deeply down the mental health route about we've got somebody that depends on us, so we're existing for someone or something. It's quite along those lines, isn't it, But I just thought it was interesting that you were almost 9 times more likely to still be alive and recover better from illness 1 year after having a heart attack, for example, than those who didn't have a dog.
The emotion of love can actually be, and I didn't know this, the emotion of love can be quite powerful in your mental well-being, in healing, and I didn't know all this. There's obviously lots of studies done on people who are in love with somebody else or somebody's in whatever, but they're all very much proving that as Jennifer Rush said, the power of love. Yeah. There's a lot to it. Yeah. Yeah. And they were saying that obviously with a dog, you've got this thing that we believe the dog loves me, and I love my dog, and I need to be there for my dog. And I remember saying to you many months ago, is retirement the biggest killer of old age people? And you were like, yeah, because you just shut down. And so it's the same thing. If you've got something to live for, yes. If you've got something that what would I do without my dog? What would my dog do without me?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it gives you a huge boost to say, I'm going to get through this and I'm going to fight and going to, get well again.
Yeah, and I think it's in my research, I see so many overlaps in this, and I think I've said on the podcast before, so I predominantly work with older adults, and I work with older adults that maybe have kind of lost function of kind of one activity or another. And what we say is obviously we want people to live longer. We've kind of achieved that, but we're not necessarily living kind of well as long. Yeah. And I think the interesting part about that is quite often when I interview and speak to older adults and I say, what is your reason for wanting to maintain independence for as long as possible? Or they always kind of come back to, I want to do it for my family, or I want to do, and which would make sense then for a pet. So it's a purpose. So you're doing it not to become a burden to somebody else. And that kind of translates into, if I've got something that's making me unwell, but I've got a dog that needs to be walked, or I've got a dog that depends on me because they're quite vulnerable, so they can't go to the kitchen and feed themselves twice a day. Actually, I've got something that they're dependent, aren't they? So we see that actually, and I think this might cross over to kind of, parents with younger children. You'll see people, you might kind of have the flu and go, I'm not going to get out of bed for 3 days, but maybe if you were a single parent of a 2-year-old, you wouldn't have the choice, you'd have to get up because of the dependence. So it's exactly the same, and actually I think it keeps us, as we said about retirement, it keeps us getting up and getting on, doesn't it? About
I've hurt your leg, for example, sitting there resting it, doing nothing with it very rarely improves it, but walking on it, moving it, getting the joints going, in a lot of cases can make it better, can help to improve it quicker. And it's the same, I guess it's the same thing. You can lie in bed feeling sorry for yourself, and you'll be in there 3 days longer than you need to. It's like, I've got to get up, I've got stuff to do.
Yeah, and I thought this was really interesting because I thought when you start to think, I'd actually come across something online that was, how old is too old to get a dog? And I thought, this is completely my remit.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting one, that, because we get a lot of people who come to us and who are wanting dogs and they're older. Yes. And I'm quite strong with them as to testing them. Yeah. Because there's a lot of, a puppy especially, there's a lot of work with a puppy. And I think a lot of people view it for numbers of reasons. I want to have something, I'm going to be out doing physical stuff. But what they don't see is all the actual other stuff other than just the walking of the dog down the road to the park or whatever. Yes. There's an awful lot of other things. But on saying that, when you're looking at older people, this thing about love, I was looking at it, some of these studies were saying heart rates slow and become more steady when you're in love, or when you've got that. Oxytocin is something that increases, which is obviously good drugs. Cortisol, which is your stress, drops. So all these things are stimulated by this emotion of love. So looking at an older person, all those things would help them. Yes. So where do you draw the line on saying you're too old for a dog? Because ultimately that dog could actually improve your physical well-being.
And this was like a kind of a question that a rabbit hole that I started to go down with no real kind of definitive answer out the other end. So I went down the same. So I was starting to read an article that said, dogs are able to shield their owners from stress. Now, that is subjective, depending on what you're quantifying, but it goes along the route of what you've just said. So, with one of the major risk factors associated with ill health is obviously stress. But the action of stroking, talking to your dog, companionship, has repeatedly been shown to cause transient decreases in human blood pressure, heart rate, and it said here, moreover, the mere presence of a dog can help to lower the autonomic responses to stressful situations. So it was talking again about experiencing kind of life stresses, grief and other things. And I thought it's really interesting because stress, we always say stress is a killer. And you've just said very similar about kind of love and those positive responses that you can get as a direct result of that. And this is exactly the same.
If your dog's badly behaved, all those lowering of stress... Exactly. Yes. So again, I can show you a survey that says exactly the opposite. And I think this is where there is no proven science, because every relationship with every dog and every person is different in a different way. Yeah. And at different times they're doing, let's say they do the survey with people who've got puppies. Yeah. And you'll get a percentage that say this and a percentage that say that, but as that dog grows older, those percentages will alter and fluctuate in between different people.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm guessing that's why there is no real solid science. It can be very subjective. Today I'm happy, my dog's doing great, but tomorrow the dog's just chewed up my best pair of trainers, and I'm really upset because I can't afford to buy another pair, and I was due to go out, and all these things. So there are all those different things.
And I think that's the thing, and I think the proof is in the pudding, in the fact that everybody goes through a puppy stage, and some people will describe that stage as being different. And most people that you speak to will go, this has been 18 months, 2 years of hard work that I've invested. And then if you're fortunate enough and you've put the work in as you should do over the whole lifespan of the dog, but you probably then find yourself in kind of a 90-10 split, don't you? So for 10% of the dog's, is puppy, but for 10% of the dog's life, you're putting in those foundations and reaping the rewards for probably, if you're fortunate, another kind of 10, 12 years of having a dog that is well behaved. And you see people and they say, the first 2 years were difficult, but then I had 12 years of a dog that was amazing. And then it's those 12 years that then sends that person out to get another puppy when, unfortunately, for example, that dog passes away. So it's funny, we kind of forget the difficulties because hopefully you say, the duration of your dog being your loyal, faithful companion kind of outweighs those, not even negatives, but the more testing periods, I suppose.
Well, I said to you, didn't I? Put the first 12 months, knock yourself out, get the training done, get your, so you've got your obedience sorted, get your behaviour. And when I say behaviour, I mean sort of the general, what the dog does around you, how they act in the house, get all those things sorted out, put your rules in place, put your boundaries in place, knock yourself out for the first 12 months. And after that, you'll have a well-behaved dog that you can just build on all those solid foundations. And you're finding that already. You can build on those foundations when things do start to change. And they will change because the things that are outside your control. I mean, dogs will get stressed over, I had one the other week, dog had been bitten. And it had changed, and the walks then became problematic because the dog was very nervous. And the same as that, somebody else has got a dog who they had training from day one, and their dog got bitten and didn't even bat an eyelid. It was almost like it hadn't happened. And I got a phone call and saying, is there something wrong with my dog? I went, pardon? And I said, no. I said, your dog's just more resilient. Yes. Your dog's learned to cope with that sort of stuff, and its world's not fallen apart. So again, it's all those different things you start to build, and you've got that good dog.
But it's interesting because those two people would respond very different to how a dog can either alleviate or add to stresses in your life, wouldn't they? Yeah. Because there's two different scenarios. And I think that's really important, and something that I say in research, that even though we tend to look at what we call cohort groups, so this is what we would call a cohort. So I would, you and I would fit into a cohort of dog owners because, you own slightly more dogs than I do. But funnily enough, probably less stressed than I am with one. So it's all relative. Because you're like, actually, I'm going to have them behave and I know exactly what I'm doing. So there is something that we, can all learn from. But I think it's interesting because we'd fit into that cohort, whereas there'll be kind of cat owners or people who don't own any pets, and they all kind of span across that spectrum. So then we say, actually, everybody's got different responses. And it is funny, I think you're absolutely right. There's kind of no definitive. As a scientist, you want to kind of compute the numbers and it say yes or no. And we work on facts quite a lot, and we work on statistics, and we say, I think I've talked about probability before, and we work within such small margins so that we know that kind of the data that we're presenting to the public is like, an absolute certainty almost, or a 0.00001 chance of anything happening, etc. in clinical trials. And this research isn't actually there because of this idea that everything, and I think we've said before, that's kind of reported around dog ownership is dependent on how people kind of feel on the day, dependent on what their dog is like. And the problem is we can never replicate such a controlled trial, if you like, because it's not the same as having 1,000 people with one condition which is exactly the same in terms of the way it develops and the way it presents. You couldn't possibly, even if I fell into a cohort of owning a show cocker spaniel and there was another 999 people that own a show cocker spaniel, it's irrelevant, in terms of, does that dog add stress, does that dog improve your physical health, because them 1,000 show cocker spaniels,
the moment you take that dog
different.
home, you've got different ways of
There's
managing
variation.
it, and you've got different variations in the dog.
Yeah.
I mean, dogs have, as we said just before, different puppies in the litter can have different types of personalities.
Yes.
And they have evolved over those thousands of years to be able to read us, to be able to figure out how we're acting, how they need to act to become part of our lives. Because living with somebody who is able to feed them and look after them and house them and take care of them, it's a lot easier, and they've obviously learnt this thousands of generations ago. Living with a tribe of humans was much easier, being given the scraps of what they'd killed, than it was actually going out and actually having to hunt down and kill the whatever they were trying to catch at the time. So I think there's a lot of that involved as well, that each dog is different. They've learnt to understand our cues, which is, again, where some of the problems, I think, that we'll touch on later on come from. Because the damage that we can do to dogs.
Just so much influence. And I think I've said previously, you would say that the same would be true of human nature. So when we're looking at human science, and it was really interesting actually. I was at a conference last week, and they were talking about an Irish, what we call an Irish longitudinal data set. So it follows people for quite some time, and it can kind of predict certain health behaviours, certain health outcomes if we follow, we call them kind of like sometimes birth cohort studies, and we can follow children all the way through into older adulthood. And it's but another interesting one is we have what's known as twin studies. So we can take a pair of identical twins and see how different kind of life factors, if you like, environments, life events, can age a pair of identical twins differently. We haven't got that same capability, and I think you'll probably agree with dogs, because if we take Marlowe, for example, and Marlowe was born in a litter with 2 brothers and 2 sisters, so a litter of 5, wasn't he? There's no possible way, once we all took those 5 siblings home, that anything then really becomes that comparable.
Well, if you take what you were saying about your twins study, I heard something, you might have told me something, I can't remember where it came from, but they did a study about gut biomes in twins, and how the gut biomes could be totally different, exactly the same genetic, identical twins, but their gut biomes were so completely different that then changed how their whole life and health and everything went. So you take a litter of 5 puppies, you take them home and you feed them one food and they feed them another food, you've got to change instantly. Never mind anything else, just food alone.
Before you introduce environmental factors and...
Well, lots of people go, zoomies, my dog's got zoomies, I think it's funny. Zoomies, in a lot of cases, is a carbohydrate rush from the food they're being fed. So it's like charging around. But when somebody's then you look at ultra-processed food, kibble, then the health benefits that doesn't have, and the lack of nutrition that you can get into that.
And to speak to that point, I had, I think, and I've shared it obviously from episode 1 of the podcast, I had a dog and a puppy before Marlowe. I was very young at the time when I had Kobe. We fed Kobe kibble, didn't know anything else. When we'd picked him up from the breeder, we kept him on the food that he'd been on from the breeder, which was kibble. Kobe as a Jack Russell, I thought it was a Jack Russell thing, and I was very young at that time and didn't know much about dogs and still learning all the time, and obviously as part of the podcast. Kobe seriously most days had zoomies. He would be fine, and then next minute up on the sofa, round. I can honestly say, touching wood, So obviously, as you know, we feed Marlowe raw food, which is what he was on, same food he was on with you from a puppy. Marlowe has never had zoomies. He's 7 months old. Of course, he's a puppy, and he's got but never ever has he gone from almost like a stationary state to eyes wide and like this round the house. And it's funny because you've just got to put that down to, like you say, no kind of over dosing sort of carbohydrates in terms of the raw foods, obviously higher in protein and other things. So you can start to see obviously how behaviours differ in different dogs, and it's all different environments. And it's funny because it makes questions like, are dogs good for your health, so subjective, because dogs are one of those things that even with humans and human genetic makeup and behaviours and twin studies and etc., it's almost like non-comparable, isn't it, in terms of we can sit here and, as I've just said, over 5,000 people, and they tested this and this in terms of health outcomes, and yeah, it is a resounding positive yes, and we can see the scientific justification of why they would improve physical health at least. But we're struggling exactly to say, would that always be the case, or has it always been the case, or will it always be?
I found something I liked. What I liked when I went through was basically dogs smelling and detecting cancer, detecting epilepsies and stuff like that. Still, again, not superbly accurate all the time, but a lot more scientific based than a lot of this stuff where we're talking. I think there was a nice saying. What was it? Something like we have chosen subjective enrichment over clinical observation, or something like that. About that we think, well, they must do good for us. Forget the size; they must be good for us. But this is an area where you can actually see it because they can actually track it, and a lot of these things with epilepsy, with cancer, it's down to, and especially people are going to have, seizures and stuff like that. There's a change in the content of their breath, the chemicals that are coming through the skin, and the dogs, the humans have actually identified what these changes are, and the dog's able then to be cued onto those. And I can smell that about to happen, bang, get the person to sit down or bark or whatever I do. So again, we are using their noses.
Yeah, we're using their capability, aren't we, to be incredible.
To actually, make sure that we're helping people who've got conditions. Same thing with PTSD, kids as well, same sort of thing with children. The things like the drop in blood sugars. And again, it's really interesting, some of the things that they're able to find. Although what they were saying was, in a lot of these, and again, this comes back to the dogs and their ability to spot cues. They were saying when you have double-blind studies, the accuracy drops.
Okay. And
they've put it down in a lot of cases to the fact that happened with Pavlov, with his dogs in the laboratory. They were originally trying to test for digestion. And that's why we had. That's why it wasn't a bell. It was misinterpreted. It was a buzzer. And that's why they had that in there, because they couldn't have anything being cued by assistants coming in or whatever. It was the buzzer that had to, because they weren't actually doing it. They were trying to figure out something else. And when that happened, it was all came together from that. Anyway, that's by the by. But so they are very, very good at spotting those cues. So with the double blinds, they are taking some of that prediction away from the dog.
Yeah, which essentially is what they need, isn't it, as well, to be able to train them, which makes perfect sense. But again, obviously, in double-blind studies, you wouldn't have that repetition or that same person or that same scenario as such.
The other thing is what you've got as well is if you are teaching a dog, because all you're doing is teaching it a behaviour. You smell this, you react like this. It's exactly the same as anything else you're teaching a dog, sit down or whatever. And if you are as a research person, clueless about how to train a dog properly, you're not using marker words, you're not cueing in the right order, then your efficiency at teaching that dog something is going to be less effective. So even if you have a whole range of dogs and you have different people training those dogs to understand what's going on, then you're going to get fluctuations in the results because you've got different capabilities of those people who are training the dogs. So you need to have the same person training them all.
Yeah, that would be a way of controlling.
So even with these things saying that in the double blinds they actually drop, it may not be down to the dog's inaccuracies, it may be down to the trainer and their inability to teach the dog at the same rate.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do just think that dogs are incredible, and they really are. I was reading a study around exactly the same. So, our dogs are able to be predictors of ill health, so going along about how they can help the health of us in some ways or another. And exactly the same as what you've just said about their ability to detect cancer, basically, and even more recently I was reading a study that was really interesting about how they'd successfully managed to train 6 dogs to identify people with bladder cancer. So basically they'd got people to provide urine samples. And like you say, the instance of that would be to allow the dog to smell the urine of those who have bladder cancer and then hopefully successfully detect that in samples that a bit are blinded, so that neither obviously the researcher who's investigating it nor the dog, obviously would know that and see how accurate it was. And I think, even as much as kind of 50, 60, 70% they were able to detect.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at stuff and it was like 70% upwards.
Which is incredible, really, to think that there may be instances where we're predisposed to cancers that might not be of kind of, whether it's moles or masses, or that might not be clinically able to be detected, but there would be a way that we could use dogs' sense of smell to be able to say, we think that there's something there that... Which is incredible, isn't it? Because they say, obviously, catching it sooner gives a better outcome. So in terms of that, dogs are incredible for our health, aren't they?
Exactly. We've all heard the story of somebody who said, and my dog started to act differently to me. It started to press paw at me, whatever. And I went to the doctors and it was this, and the dog saved my life. So you've always got those types of one-off types of stories. And again, that is really one of the big things that reinforces because there might be no science behind it. It might just be fluke that the dog or the person just feels a little bit off and they're starting to act a little bit differently. The dog might be able to smell some difference in them, in their secretions that's coming out of the skins, so they do act differently. For whatever reason, it's something that somebody spots, either the human or whatever, and it does make a big difference. And those types of little stories make us also really go, yeah, dogs really are good for us, aren't they? They're really good.
And there's just things, and it's interesting, it's probably the perfect time when I started to look at it, and I agree, I think their ability to support day-to-day physical health, and then for it to span into being quite transformational of detection of preventing ill health, I think I can 100% see that narrative. I can see how we can do studies, even if they're cross-sectional, to say, this is how they can really support. And I think I agree. I think I can understand from the physical to the mental how there's some transferability. But it's interesting, isn't it, that we've got this narrative now that dogs really do help our health. And I think something that when I was speaking to, obviously, my Lisa about this was this idea that we've now seen this increase in therapy dogs in school. So obviously Lisa works in a school and they have 2 therapy dogs in their school. So 2 absolutely gorgeous black Labradors they have roaming around their school. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because schools are pretty rigorous places in terms of things that they have to check for, procedures that they put in, but before they bring things in. And also the single biggest factor for me for this is the consent of the parents absolutely has to be there. It's not as simple as we're having therapy dogs in our primary and secondary schools, but if parents don't consent, we're going to have them there anyway. It just doesn't work that way because of, allergies and other things that we can obviously get onto. So it's interesting that even parents will buy into this. Now, if I was a parent of a small child and somebody said we're going to have dogs in our schools, I would probably question a little bit more than the average person, given my background and given this podcast and given other things that we debate. But as a dog lover who understands how much my dog can add to my life and how much I would want my child to be around dogs, it probably would be, having I have some questions answered, yes, that's fine. So it's interesting, isn't it, about there must be some narrative now where we think that this is helping children now having the presence of dogs in schools.
Well, again, I think it's the whole thing. It's about selling. Dogs sell stuff. So pet food companies were the first ones to start doing this. Dogs are great because it helps people buy dogs more. Pet food, exactly. So you've got all that, and then you've got everything from Disney doing these anthropomorphic dogs that we all go, oh my God, they understand every word. All these things that these dogs do, we just build that narrative in our head that dogs help. We've then got puppy yoga. And there's so many of these well-being classes now that are linked with dogs. Yeah. Dogs. I've seen them on the internet. Dogs doing yoga with it's like, where's all that come from? Yeah. So I think there is so much there that is slamming into us on a day-to-day basis, whereby people are going, yeah, dogs are great for us. Look at, oh, isn't that good? Oh, isn't that good?
It's like positive reinforcement for us, isn't it? It's like everywhere where the marketing is, oh, it's all positive and positive. And that's why so many of us rush out and buy a puppy, because we're thinking this is going to add to our lives. It's only really when you get them home and you're thinking, wow, this is and most people recognise that before they've got puppies, of course.
I had one recently with, I applied pressure to her. I'm a first-time dog owner. Yes. And I just applied the pressure. Do you know about this? Tell me what you know about that. And I was probably a bit rough with her, but what happened was the following day, she didn't phone up. They never phone up. They send you a message. Circumstances have changed and we've decided we're not going to go forward with the dog. Yes. Which is great for me because that pressure I've applied has done what it was supposed to do. It's made you think again realistically about not what you think dog ownership is about, but what it actually is about. And it's good when that happens because it just saves a problem.
If you're not prepared for what's to come.
Yeah, so it is. But yeah, with this children thing, I mean, are these Labradors trained in any way? Or are they just wandering around, but good, well-mannered Labradors and kids stroking them?
Yes, no, they are trained. They are actually, they are the pets of somebody who works at the school, and I think the time and effort that's gone into training them through several different kind of avenues has been extensive, and they, I think, equally probably are just well-mannered Labradors. I'm not saying the training was no good or was in it or whatever, but I can go through a dozen different stories of people who've bought our dogs. Yeah. And everything from one family bought a dog, the child hadn't spoken a word, the kid was 6 years old, hadn't spoken a word in its 6 years of life. Yeah. She phoned me 24 hours later going, oh my God, my boy's spoken, first two words, hello and the dog's name. I've seen kids that were very insular and very nervous. They come back 6 months later when they bring the puppy back, it's growing to show us and see them. Kid's a different kid. Yeah. And these aren't trained dogs. These aren't going to courses. So I think there's something there with the dogs and children where there is this connection. And there is. But on the reverse of that, you can see the internet's full of idiots who allow their dog to smack the dog on the head, who are sitting in the dog's crate, sticking the fingers in its bowl, and then they wonder why the dog bites the kid's arm. Yeah, and you do have to be exceptionally careful, and I don't even know where, I wouldn't begin to know where the regulations around school dogs kind of comes in, but it's interesting that you've just used those two examples because it was actually, I think it was like a systematic review essentially of trying to summarise research findings of the presence of therapy dogs in classrooms and how what the benefits and the effects of that might be, and it was kind of over 30 articles and book chapters and other sources all into this review. So it was quite a lot of data really between 2001 2017, so it's really interesting just to see like almost a 17 year period of the benefits. And it was really quite interesting because actually, and I didn't really expect this to come out, but it was talking about how children's speech and language and literacy skills improved. So what some of these schools did was kind of had the dog sit there and the child read to the dog, as opposed to the child read to a member of staff. And they were basically saying that the children gained in confidence in reading. They loved reading more because obviously there was this presence of the dog that they wanted to read to rather than... And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you can have somebody sat next to you that gives you, you know, you and I could sit across from each other and, you know, body language or facial expression can give you, you know, positive or negative cues, same as you would to a dog. But there's something about a dog, isn't there, it's a bit almost verging on kind of unconditional love, isn't it? There's no judgment, there's no feeling anxious, there's no anxiety about how that dog's perceiving you. So for children, I can really see how that would be beneficial. And also it was saying about dogs in primary schools in terms of the dog was then seen as kind of a level of stability around the school for children who lived in poverty or came from abusive homes, but also how obviously having therapy dogs in schools teaches children responsibility, builds confidence, you know, and it also teaches them, if they haven't got an animal in the home, how an animal is vulnerable and you have to care for them, and it teaches them things that maybe they hadn't previously.
Teaches the kid that they're not the centre of the universe anymore, that actually, I got my first dog at 6, you've got to look after it. You know, the world doesn't revolve around me anymore, I've got to do things for some... Exactly.
Yeah, because actually I bet there's quite a lot of children, just by nature of being children, where parents do everything for the children. So it gives and instills a level of responsibility, doesn't there? That there's a different kind of dynamic in the house that needs your care rather than it just always being a one-way.
And all those things as well are, as you say, are good for... You can't look at them and say, yes, do X, do Y, do Z, and you'll be this, you'll be happy, you'll be whatever, you'll be a better reader, whatever. But you can see how all those things can develop. I mean, I've seen several people who've had children and they have been I don't know what the correct terminology is, but they have been poor communicators. And because they've got a dog, they can talk to the dog. And then they can talk to their parents about what they've been doing with the dog, and that then improves the communication skills of the child because they've got something that they can talk to.
Which is incredible when you start to think, and this is why I think the first question I asked about what do we quantify as good health, how are they good for us, is again subjective. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because actually we can see where the narrative comes from, that yes, they are, because we've gone down several different roads and said, you know, yes, we can see the rationale for yes for this, and now we're even starting to bridge in, is there things that it can instill in children from a young age that might make them more resilient, you know, more, and actually how would these things then transpire into adulthood and all of these different things. So you start to think absolutely yes, and obviously we've proposed arguments for, well, it's subjective, so often no. I mean, totally different avenue, but people probably wouldn't tend to have dogs then about... Some people are just allergic, so then what are the consequences of bringing home a puppy that we think is hypoallergenic and then your child's allergic, so is that bad for your health? And all of these different things that contribute. And I think the interesting thing for me, and I think something that rings quite true, is this idea around knowing yourself, knowing your capabilities, knowing when things are right for you. And we've proposed a lot of it's good for you for X, Y and Z. And I think we'd said before, who are we to say no when somebody is 80 and wants to take home a puppy for the first time, or about all the mental health benefits and the companionship. But it's funny, I think one thing I did want to draw on is, and I've said before on the podcast about being a healthy ageing researcher and about things that reduce our independence or affect our independence. And one single biggest predictor of those is kind of episodes of ill health or like, for example, instances of falls and how they affect kind of our physical capabilities. And it's interesting because when I speak to older adults quite a lot, a reason for falling or a reason for falling over and breaking something, which then is a period of not being able to be physically active, a lot of the times is I fell over the dog.
Right.
I tripped over the dog. Or I have to walk my dog the same in the winter as I do in the summer, but he pulls me in the summer and that's fine, and he always pulled me. But he pulled me in the winter and it was icy, and now I've fallen and broken my hip. So we see all of these things. And it's really interesting because I kind of sit on the practical side of being a researcher that works with older adults. And I partly think back again to the same as when we choose to get a puppy in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I think we need to exercise some like what we call realistic appraisal of the situation. So, for example, if you're going to take a dog but your mobility is not good, then it probably isn't right for your health.
Well, you move into a completely different sector here because dogs pulling, I can train dogs not to pull, so can a lot of people. But maintaining a dog not pulling when you are probably older is more difficult because you're not physically as capable, and it can be quite challenging to get the dog under control. There are tools you can use. So you have slip leads, for example, that are designed to apply pressure to stop dogs doing things. This, and again, talking about stuff with no scientific backup, you have dogs that pull on leads and they're pulling on the collar. And, you know, people go, oh my God, it's this, and it'll hurt its neck, and it's this. There's no scientific proof at all, period, to say that a dog pulling on its collar is going to cause it any form of physical problem. We can assume it does, but on the reverse of that, we could also assume that if it was hurting, as it would with us, you'd actually stop pulling, which is where you then get into the realm of using tools. Now, there is a variety of different collars, martingale collars, prong collars. They're all designed to give you a certain level of control in certain circumstances. So again, if the older people were looking at using certain tools, you would be able to say, well, this collar can help me because it allows my dog not to pull. It teaches my dog that there are consequences for pulling, and then my dog gets what they call collar smart. It goes, okay, I won't do that again.
So it removes that risk. So then they're able
so they've got the pleasure of the dog. They have got the pleasure of walking around and doing stuff but they haven't got. So I had one years ago. A lady had a Labrador. The dog got bitten at 6 months old and attacked. And since then, the dog was a maniac on the leash, and it was barking and lunging, all fear reactivity to push these other dogs away or to get it away from these other dogs because it was frightened. But the strength of this dog lunging on this leash pulled the owner over. Now, she then had a huge issue, probably same with older people here. I've been pulled over, so I'm really nervous about taking the dog out again, and I didn't want to do it alone, and so I didn't do it, and we didn't do this, and you then have that mental downward spiral. She got to a point where she was frightened to walk the dog in case it pulled her over again because I can't control it. I put a prong collar on her Labrador, not for the dog, but to give her the confidence that if the dog decided to lunge on the leash, the prong collar would correct that behaviour very, very quickly. And I showed her how it worked. I showed her on a hand. You know, the pressure isn't the same. It's a different way of applying pressure. It doesn't damage your dog. It doesn't dig holes into all these stupid things that people say. Because she had all those. I'm not sure. I've heard bad things about prong collars. Anyway, we showed her how it worked, and we put it on her dog, and her dog lunged once and stopped. Her confidence went boing through the roof. She then started to walk the dog more confidently. In her case, what was happening was her stress and anxiety when she was walking the dog was transmitting to the dog. The dog's going, what we stressed about, what we're worried about, and then it's kicking off even more. So because she wasn't stressed anymore or anxious, the dog calmed right down. And almost within 5 minutes, she was like, wow, this is great, I can walk the dog. So those types of things are things, again, that we should be looking at. You know, we look at tools on dogs. And again, when we talk about well-being, we talk about well-being of the dog. The dog needs to be properly looked after, and all those well-being things are focused on the dog. However, a badly behaved dog is, as we've just been saying, detrimental to the human's well-being. Sure, yeah. So there's both sides of the spectrum here. So to use a tool to create a well or a better behaved dog to improve the well-being and the mental health of the owner.
And then that transmits positively to the dog. It's like a continuous cycle, isn't it? And I think it's quite interesting. It's interesting for our different outlooks, because I started to look into, obviously, and speaking to older adults more about pets, and we've all got parents that are aging or have had parents. In terms of them, they say, you know, I think I would quite like a puppy, and you're going, oh, I'm not sure, and even you're cautious, and then that makes them cautious. But I think it's about looking at it, like you've just said then, quite interestingly, from a more kind of well-rounded view, and say, actually, there's benefits that you can get from this, but you've got to be open to tools that you can help, you know, manage or, you know, instill better behaviours. And then actually, if you've got a dog, like you say, I think the key to it is having a dog that is trained properly, you know, like you say, is well behaved the majority of the time, that then you can put in and get out and have that two-way relationship. And then obviously they add to our health, don't they?
Of course they do, but the big thing with that is you have got the skewed narrative of people saying, Puh, you know, even down to slip leads, you know, putting a dog on don't be stupid putting your dog on a collar, put it on a harness. These are all coming from points of view from people who are either A, virtue signalling, I want to be seen as doing the right thing, and I know what I'm talking about, and you're being horrible to your dog, which comes back to us believing that our dogs are little mini humans. And all those things, but you've got all that drama around a tool that could help somebody live better with their dog, could have a happier existence with the dog. You know, and it's like anything. If there are consequences to your actions, you don't do them, because those consequences aren't worth doing those actions. So you learn very quickly, and dogs learn quicker, a lot quicker than humans in a lot of cases. They will learn that I'm not going to pull on the leash because it's not what I want to do. It's not pleasant, and therefore they don't do it. So it's not as though you are and again, this is the narrative these people are putting out. You know, if you have got to use a collar like that to get your dog to walk properly, put them on a halter lead. Halter leads are horrible, but the narrative is that they're not. Yes. They are an aversive technique, and because it looks nice, because it's just a piece of a figure of 8 over the dog's nose, that's not a problem. It's horrendous. It's an absolutely horrendous tool, because it gives the dog no respite from that aversion. If I have an aversive tool around the dog's neck, a collar, a prong collar, for example, and the dog decides to make a good decision, doesn't get any problems with its walking nicely, the collar is slack, there is no problem. Yeah. But I've got a halter around the end of my dog's nose. That dog has got an aversive tool. No matter what it does, that aversive tool is applying pressure and stress to the dog. And these people, I'll use a nicer term, who think that they're using a halter and they're being kind, but somebody using a prong collar is being horrible. Just get your head in order, because you don't understand what you're talking about. You know, it's just ridiculous that they think something like a halter is actually nice, and it's not.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because we talk about this idea about dogs being good for our health, and I think we've really covered in this episode about how it can really fluctuate depending on circumstances, depending on dog behaviour, depending on individual human characteristics, differences. And I think it just shows, again, like everything that we discuss on the podcast, about this idea that, you know, there are things out there that you can see things from a different viewpoint. You can, put different time and effort into your dog. You can look at different behaviours. You can look at different approaches. And actually, these all have either positive or negative consequences on health, on outcomes of, you know, on dogs' health, human health, stress, indicators, all of the rest of it. And it is quite interesting, isn't it? Because you could have a dog that you say, this dog doesn't add to my health, it actually takes away because it provides me stress, because it's lunging on the lead, but actually, like you say, by consulting and getting some help, it actually might be a relatively quick fix and they could add to your life.
Exactly. The other side to that is the damage that we're doing to dogs.
Yes.
And there's an awful lot of things like that, quite simply, that can be changed by, I am giving the dog stress because the dog's causing me stress. I then get stressed, so I'm causing the dog stress. It's a vicious circle. But just by breaking that circle, by actually either doing some training or by using a tool that will help. And again, people go, oh, but you can abuse tools. Anything can be abused.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, I don't need a tool, to abuse a dog. Nobody does. You can, if you want to abuse a dog, you can pick a stick up, you can hit it with a lead, you can kick it with your shoe. It doesn't really matter. You can abuse the dog. If you're that way inclined, you don't need a tool to abuse a dog.
Yes.
And tools are not there to abuse dogs. Tools are not there to cause the dog a problem. They're tools to be able to allow the dog to make good decisions and teach it that there is a right and a wrong, a good and a bad.
Yeah.
It's how they live their life. But those problems that we cause dogs are massive when you're talking about the emotional side. We talk about it on the lead and the dog's lunging and barking, but you mentioned before if you've had a death in the family, that anxiety, because we then use the dog as an emotional sponge.
Yes.
To soak up our sorrow. We cry on the dog's shoulder, and the studies on this to show what problems people are causing their dogs.
Yeah.
And there's a variety of different things that we are doing to damage our dogs.
Yeah, because I suppose if they see you in that, vulnerable and kind of quite emotional state, they're not really computing, are they, like we do, about the reasons why you may be behaving that way. They just know that's not usual for you. I suppose it's quite difficult for them to kind of comprehend and understand, and it puts them in a state of anxiety, doesn't it? Because that's not usually how you behave. And it's funny, then you come, I suppose, full circle and ask yourself whether we're asking our dogs good for our health. And I think we've probably spoke on this multiple times about how that flips, and are sometimes we always good for dogs' health.
Well, when you look at a big thing nowadays, a lot of people there's lots of stress and anxiety in people.
Yes.
And therefore what you have with that is you have an emotional swing.
Yeah.
So 1 minute you can be very attentive to a dog.
Yeah.
Next minute you're very detached.
Yeah.
That becomes very confusing. And the dog then doesn't know what it's going to get, attention or no attention. You end up then causing the dog stress and anxiety.
Yeah, I suppose for those individuals that fluctuate in kind of in mood and mental state and things, it's difficult for a dog to, like you say, form patterns of behaviour or pinpoint, if I do more of this, it's a positive outcome, as opposed to if I do more of this, it's a negative outcome, because obviously that kind of feedback isn't actually dependent on what they're doing necessarily, is it? It's dependent on a person's, obviously.
Well, you've got so many different things whereby they... people say, oh, they understand every word I say, and they're very good at reading cues, they're very good at picking up on things, and they then, you see it on the internet all the time, there's a destroyed toilet roll, or the house has been trashed, sofas all over the place, and they'll go, have you done this? And the dog faints this sort of, oh my God, I've done really wrong. Yeah. Because they're picking up on your cues, they listen to your tonality, and they listen to... the rhythms of your voice. Yeah. And I think I said to you very early on, start teaching a dog a no in a very low, controlled manner. It doesn't have to be loud, but just that word no, yes, in a low manner can help you. It's the same thing with this. When you're in a certain state, your voice will have a certain rhythm to it. Yeah. The dog picks up on those rhythms and realises that you're angry, you're annoyed, you're happy or whatever. And therefore... if you're sending out mixed signals to the dog's confused, the dog's got anxious, the dog's now stressed. You're then creating bad behaviours because the dog's channeling from you. Yeah.
With kind of no understanding of the reasons why behind that, isn't it? So,
if you have a dog that gets stroked and gets cosseted and gets attention when you're in a really upset, depressed mood, the dog associates that attention with the depressed mood. Very similar. When you talk about training a dog, you train a dog. If you're in a bad mood, don't train your dog.
Yes.
Because your dog associates that bad energy, if you'd like to call it that, with the behaviours that you're teaching it. So therefore, the dog's less likely to want to do it later on because it hasn't got a positive association with the environment and what was going on around it. Same thing now, you've got attention, you're stroking a dog. The dog now associates the attention it's getting from you with a bit of a bad energy.
Yeah.
And I know energy is not the best word to use because it smacks of crystals and stuff like that, but they pick up on those cues that we don't know we're giving out. So you then start to have a dog that's getting anxious again and stressed because I need to feel in this strange mood for me to get the attention from my owner.
Yeah, it's a whole, but yeah, you can see how it spans over a whole space, can't you? Of before you know it, you've reinforced what you didn't want to reinforce as opposed to what you did.
And again, things like you've got behaviours in dogs, they then start to pursue certain behaviours, or not pursue, but develop certain behaviours. So you'll have things like pacing, lip licking, all stress-related behaviours, scratching. You can even get itch, skin itching and skin irritations and things like that are all stress-related.
Okay.
Well, just look at humans. You're stressed, you get acne.
Yeah.
So the same thing happens with dogs, although they don't get acne. They have problems with the skin and itching and scratching.
Yeah, so if you start to see dogs like kind of excessively licking paws and things like that and scratching
those are stress behaviours, but it's not necessarily that the dog is stressed. It could be that the dog is stressed because of you, the owner.
Yeah.
So that's the B side of it. That's the side that, we want to have our dog, and again, we unload on them. A lot of people unload on them with regards to their emotional state, and the dog just soaks it all up and just becomes a mess.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because like you say, we've started this episode to say, are they good for our health? But I think it's worth noting that there's so many things, I suppose, that we can do, or physical and mental states that we can be in that would have like a transient effect on them really as well. So it's definitely a two-way process, and for all that they can add to our health and we can add to their health, there can be some quite negative consequences at the other end for both.
You ask a dog to do something and it's just learning your reactions, it's learning your responses to things, and they do the same thing. It's almost like they learn what you're about. So you can have some very innocuous things where they learn the person's smiling, I have a dog here, and I can just go, do spins, and she jumps up and down and she bounces round and does these sort of spins like this. But just those words, do spins, and she knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. So you've got the same thing with all different walks of our personality that the dogs pick up on. And some of them are, fine, no problems at all. And they bring us joy, they bring us happiness. But when we start to move into that emotional unloading that we have, that's where we end up with huge problems with dogs, where it doesn't become beneficial to the dog.
And it's obviously not to us, hence the reason why we're transmitting that.
So there's a lot of situations whereby you have a dog that can be unhappy. Yeah. Not because there's anything wrong with the dog, but because of the environment that it's living in. Yeah. So it's quite a well-rounded subject there. Yeah. It does go both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think when we started out this episode, we started out saying, it's actually really, and sometimes we don't always find this with the topics that we bring to the podcast in terms of whether it's kind of a resounding yes or no. And it almost was quite a resounding yes, even though I suppose there was a caveat to that there was no real science to say reasons for yes or no. But I think, as we always try to, bring quite an impartial view of what the reasons might be for one end of the spectrum to the other. And I think we always cover quite a lot, and I think it's, as always, is a fair bit of information to digest, but it's almost like quite a for and against about how some things can be positive for both our health and the dogs, but also there's instances where it isn't always that way.
Yeah, I mean, they're very good at reading your expressions. Mm-hmm. They're very good at reading your moods from these micro expressions and all these different things, and they can also they can balance your rhythms. So if you've got high cortisol levels, they've done tests with dogs and humans. And they've seen that the heart rates can balance, cortisol and stress levels can balance. So if you're in a stressful relationship or in a stressful environment, those things will impact on your dog because they'll balance theirs with yours.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that a lot of the damage is done, where we don't really see.
It's the things we can't see.
See. And I think there is food for thought, whereas the one end was saying, hey, don't worry about it. We don't need science to tell us that dogs are good
for us.
We also should look at it and go, we don't need science to tell us that we are actually impacting negatively upon our dogs.
Yes. Works both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that there's a little bit more resistance to that, to actually think that our way of acting
could have a
negative. And I've seen this quite with the work I've done with fireworks, and the amount of people who are just resistant to the fact that cosseting your dog is not the thing to do when the fireworks are blasting round the dog's head. Yeah. And you're just reinforcing that fearful state of mind. You act fearful and I'll give you some attention, extra attention. It's there, it's in black and white, just find it and read it. But we don't want to seem to have to take that, because that's casting dispersions on the way we're living with our dogs. Yeah. But yet we're quite happy to ignore the fact that there isn't any science that says our dogs make us happier and just believe it. We're weird, aren't we, humans?
We are. We just like telling ourselves what we want, what we want to hear.
But I just want to ask you, I came across something, and I want to go through this with you because I've come across it a number of times. Let me find it now. I had to put this in here because, okay, here we go. Now, I've come across this before and I've not had somebody I can talk to who can actually give me a sense. It might not be a subject we can discuss now. It might be quite a big one that we have to discuss at another time. Yeah. And if it's something that you think it's a bigger subject. So, part of what I was looking at was dogs don't understand every word, and all this sort of, they don't understand things like jealousy and all those sort of complex envy, greed. They don't understand those complex human emotions. Yeah. They haven't got the brain complexity for it, and they also haven't got the linguistic ability to express those emotions. Yeah. So to think that they could is a bit daft. Now, what some scientists have been doing is they call it the cognitive bias task. Yep. Do you know about this?
Yes.
Where you've got your dark colour, your light colour, your food, and it's how fast the dog runs from right to left. Yep. Now, I have a huge disconnect with this actually being effective.
Okay.
Because, just to sort of give people out there an explanation, you have it can be done in a few different ways. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a dark board and you put food there with nothing in it. Okay. And you have a board that is light and you have food there, a bowl there with food in it. And what that's supposed to do when you condition the dog to go to either of them is that if they are more likely to run towards the bowl with food more quickly, it shows more of a positive mindset as opposed to if they're going to go to the other side as a negative mindset, and how slowly they go there. Now, going right back to what I said at the beginning is that when you have this DNA that says move towards things that are good for you, stay away that things are bad for you, well, that's bad for me because there's nothing in that bowl.
Yeah.
So what's your experience of this? Is this something that is useful in projecting whether a dog is more, I know they don't use the words depressed and happy, but they're using it as how they are feeling about a certain situation. Are they feeling happier about it or less comfortable about it? Is there any science in that, or is it just because again, a lot of the stuff I've heard is that when you're obviously going out, putting this research out, and you're looking for people to fund your research and fund your projects.
Yep.
You want to make sure you're getting something back as a paying, I don't know what the word is, customer.
Yeah.
I want the research to say about this with the dogs. When you're putting that research back, you actually want to feel as though you've got something positive, confirmation bias, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
So do you have it as is it something that people are using as a way of trying to create new research projects and create new science that can actually create new fundings, or is there something in it? Because I can't see it. I can't see it being realistic.
Yeah, no, and I wouldn't say it was a realistic thing that's overly used for that purpose, nor would I would agree with you, nor would I see how that scientifically would work. You know, in terms of cognitive bias, obviously being more predisposed to one thing than another based on a set of circumstances. It's obviously something we see in human behaviour, but I agree with you. I'm not sure where the rationale would be in dogs that it would be an association to a positive outcome, wouldn't it?
Yes.
More than
a pessimism, positive outcome. How positive do you feel about this certain situation? And I just, because obviously I come back to Pavlov again, same thing there. Yeah. You've got to take out all humans anywhere near this because we give cues and we don't know we're doing it. Yes. So we've got the dog going, oh, I should go this way because they want me to go this way. Yeah. So the dog isn't really autonomous in its decision-making process.
And I feel like the way to show that would be if you've got the light and dark board and the food is always at the light, then you would expect over time them to just completely bypass the dark and always go to the light. Whereas if it was interchangeable between each trial period, then you wouldn't have that same stream of, oh, well, I'll always go that way because that's always where the reward is. So that's kind of how you can see. And we look at it in terms of human behaviour. It's exactly the same with dogs. If you go somewhere constantly, it's only a negative experience or negative outcomes, you would be more likely to not repeat that again.
Well, that was what I was saying. That was my first point about the DNA going, I'm not going to go towards something that's bad. I'm going to stay away from it.
So the same with older adults. So if I go out in winter, once I reach 85 and I start to fall and that's an unpleasant outcome, then I don't navigate that environment in the winter when it's icy the same. So I just choose to go out once I know that the footpaths have been gritted, or we're always kind of trying to have this realistic appraisal of the best possible outcome, aren't we? Yeah. And that's basically what it comes down to.
Because this is what I was sort of looking at it, and it was sort of trying to gauge how happy dogs were in certain circumstances, yes, and as to how we could improve our engagement with them. And I just thought this is just so far away from being an accurate test.
Yeah. And I think you would probably say, wouldn't you, that that's probably not increasing their happiness because they don't know what they're supposed to do. So if they find themselves in an unfamiliar situation where they're not sure, it's a new environment, surely it's more anxiety inducing than it would be. It's only through repetition of it being the same activity that surely it would bring about a more positive outcome than.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, you go to a new environment, or you do something new with your dog. You're teaching it a new behaviour, or you go to a different person's house, and the dog's a bit nervous to start with. But again, they draw from you being super confident. Come on, buddy, let's go. Yeah. and you wander in, and one of the big things I say to people about, oh, my dog doesn't like the car.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you get in the car first, or do you try and put the dog in first? Oh, well, I try to put the dog in first.
Yes.
Well, if the dog's nervous about going in the car, why don't you just get in the car first? And the dog goes, okay, it's not dangerous in there, fine, I'll go in. Yeah. Same type of thing, that confidence you exert gives that dog confidence. So that dog's level of stress that it has about this new environment is very quickly overcome because my owner is confident and I've not got a problem with this. So let's go, yeah. Yeah. So it's all those types of things, and that letting a dog try and figure it out in a lot of cases can be very, very stressful for the dog.
Leads to it's the unknown. They can't gauge from you about whether it's a good environment or not.
I suppose if you look at it with regards to things like, I've hidden £100 in this room somewhere, but I'm not going to tell you where it is, and you've got 2 minutes to find it. Your stress level builds and builds and builds and builds and builds.
Yeah, and the closer it gets to the 2 minutes ending, the more.
If I had some little stones, and whenever you were moving away from where the £100 was, I threw a stone at you and it hit you, and you didn't go move the opposite way.
You'd steer clear of the...
Exactly. I'm showing you what you don't want to do, and I'm guiding you to your goal.
And you would quickly learn. Yeah. And probably get a better outcome sooner.
Exactly. And your stress level then drops, and you would have found the £100 before the 2 minutes were up, and the stress disappears because you've achieved a result. And part of the well-being scenario is that the dog feels that they have succeeded.
Yes.
Feels that they have had a win. And there's so much in this with regards to sort of the training that we could carry on talking for hours about, but
and I think that would be, like you say, it would be a good topic for the podcasters in a bigger conversation to unpick some of the reasons behind that, which obviously we might not have quite covered today. But I do think the hiding of the £100 and the stone game might be what we bring to the podcast next month, with it being Christmas. We'll give it a test.
But that's the thing, you're giving your dog instruction, both positive and negative, to allow them to understand what the parameters are.
Yeah, but you can see that I know what I'm supposed to be doing, so I can, you can even see it now. We kind of have and you have to kind of teach them for all eventualities, but we pretty much have a very similar routine in the evening in terms of how we settle down and the expectation, and you can see Marlowe really starting to kind of go into that restful mode because he knows he's in that position where, okay, we settle at this time of night and I know that I'm not going to be disturbed, and I know I'm doing the right thing and everybody's doing their thing, and it just allows for that kind of restful time because he knows that it's not constant people coming and going, and I'm a bit anxious and I never know quite what's going to happen, and it's, I suppose it speaks to that point as well, doesn't it? But
as they know, that's the thing, the knowing, the understanding of what's expected of you, both positive and negative,
creates for surely a happier dog.
No stress, gone. I know I'm not allowed to do, I know I am supposed to do. So again, I think those things that are the big things. There's so much in this that, and you start to think about it. There's so many ways the dogs can help us with our problems and our health and our mental well-being, but we don't actually think of it the opposite way. We don't actually do the same thing in return. We will complain about tools being unfair without understanding them. We will want our dogs not to have any form of stress in their life without actually understanding that stress is good for learning. And it's good for positive outcomes. If you know what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
I didn't expect the conversation to go that way. As I say, I never know where it's going to go because I don't know what you've researched.
Yeah.
But as I say, when you start to unpack the whys and wherefores around it,
it's actually quite same as all topics we cover. It can actually get quite complex because it's not just as simple as yes, no.
Well, we've been talking for nearly 2 hours, and it's like we could do another 2 hours on that. There's just so many more little things that we can talk about. It drops into things like this again, lack of stress.
Yeah.
And the force free, the sort of the consent, getting consent from your dog to stroke it. Saw something on the internet with some woman. This golden retriever or Labrador came up to her, and it sort of snuggled into her, nuzzled into it, and then it went like that and rolled onto its back. And she went, "This is the dog telling you that I don't want attention." And it was ludicrous.
Yeah.
It was absolutely ludicrous. And luckily, there's a lot of people going, "You don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah.
But if you are the person that believes that, you're creating huge problems for your dog, because you're building in emotions and ways of acting that the dog has no clue about, and you're still further creating confusion. The dog's now coming into you for a cuddle and then doing that, going, "Scratch my belly, mum," and you're going, "Okay, you don't want touching." And that you're misreading that dog so dramatically that the dog's now got further confusion, because I want an attention, and how do I get attention? You've just turned me away.
I know. We just overcomplicate everything, don't we, really?